Got to kick it off with the Mets right now.
Yep.
You know what, Kim? Because this team is 7 games over the 500 mark, beat a really good Brewer team last night.
Yeah.
There's not much chasing them when you look at that National League East. I mean, the Atlanta Braves are still 2 games under the 500 mark. You look at this Met team, and a couple things have hit me. First off, they're a good team, right? Sometimes you look at teams that are kind of a product of their division. I don't think the Mets are necessarily just a product of their division. I think they've dealt with a lot this year. Guys being out. We know how brilliant DeGrom is. They've gotten an uptick. Taijuan Walker has been absolutely fantastic. A guy that was signed late in free agency. The bench players, this is the impact of Steve Cohen when you look at the owner. The bench players that they had, quality veteran players that were able to step in when guys went out and got hurt. And this team has all the earmarks now getting McNeil, Conforto, Brandon Nimmo back. Hearing what Scott, the general manager, had to say about adding potential pieces coming the July 31st MLB trade deadline. Rumor last week that maybe they've had conversations with Minnesota about Josh Donaldson. Right. That they were interested in, making a trade with the Cubs during the course of the offseason, potentially, when you look at their big third baseman. So I look at this Met team, Kim, and I look at a team that I think is just going to get better and better as this season does go along. They're a really likable group as well. And, last night, you get a solid start from a guy in Tyler McGill that you never anticipated, a Brewer team that is really, really good. Tie game late. You get the heroics by Pete Alonso. Edwin Diaz in save situations has been off the charts good this year. Got himself into a little trouble, got himself out of it. And this team right now is really playing quality baseball as we're quickly approaching the All-Star break.
I think you set up all of that perfectly. I'm not used to working with someone at the fan these days. I'm usually doing these solo shows where I'm talking to myself and, of course, to the audience, or at least I hope there's an audience listening for my solo shows.
Sure.
A couple of things working backwards a little bit.
Yeah.
This is stating, I know, the obvious to a great Mets fan. Diaz, no chance, gets out of that last night 2 years ago.
Oh, no way.
I mean, no chance.
No
I mean,
way.
we are sitting here then in a different world, as we know.
Yeah.
But talking about the idea this guy can't, the whole can't make it in New York thing has completely gone away. I give him a great amount of credit for that, by the way. Whatever help he got, Rojas, pitching coach, perhaps other folks he reached out to, teammates, whatever the case might be. I give Diaz credit for doing what is very hard in this town, Moose. It's hard to completely change a narrative about yourself. That being said, I watched last night thinking he's going to blow this.
So did I.
And he didn't. So there you go with Edwin Diaz, who is also, to me, very likable for that reason. And likability, just so you know, is not paramount. And it's not paramount for me. But I got to be honest, it helps. And it's really helping one Met in particular right now, and that's Lindor. Because Lindor isn't giving you much. He's giving you a little bit, these last couple games, and you'll take every bit of it. But the bat's been slow, but nothing else has essentially failed him as a Met. He's a great team guy by every account. He has helped to change the culture in that locker room by saying, essentially, we're not just going to celebrate the guy who wins the game for us. We're going to celebrate all the guys who led up to the hero winning that game.
Yeah.
You see him on the mound. Maybe you've seen this, and you're a great person for me to ask. I haven't asked anybody. I have never seen meetings at the mound where a position player does a lot of the talking, and Lindor does.
He does.
When he gets together, especially with certain pitchers.
Yes.
I'm not saying I've seen it with DeGrom on the mound, but there aren't many meetings at the mound when DeGrom's on the mound because he's flying through. But some of these...
Nor does he want a meeting.
I'm sure he doesn't. Some of these situations, and he might be the one guy who says, Francisco, I'm good. But when he is talking to some of the pitchers on the mound,
yes,
they give him every bit of their attention. I am fascinated by that dynamic with the Mets. I'm a little worried about Conforto. But other than that, your appraisal of everything going on is spot on. I like Villar.
Yep.
I love Pilar.
Yep.
Love him and everything that he's about. They made some really good moves. And, I don't know that now's the time for credit for everyone involved and bows or anything like that, even though we are, close to the All-Star break when we'll need to talk about something. They've done a really good job building this roster, and you can't say that with every team in this town.
No, you can, and we'll get to the Yankees and the doozy of a job that they did during the course of the offseason and where they are right now, Kim. But Here's the other thing, if I'm a Met fan right now, that, off the July 4th holiday weekend that I'm excited about, this team's going to add, right? They're going to do something, right? I mean, they're not going to stand pat. It's year one Cohen. This team has shown you a pulse. I think they're going to be a really, really dangerous team. They really.
Oh, I see what you mean. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I got lost there for a sec.
Yeah.
That was my fault. Okay.
Yeah.
I got you.
I think they're going to. I think
You're
July,
going to add two.
They're going to add to this group. I think they're and it might not be Barrios from the Minnesota Twins. It might not be Donaldson from the Twins. It might end up being Chris Bryant from the Cubs. See what happens with Chicago, and but they're going to add something to this team. I really believe that. And. Everyone could always use a bullpen arm. This bullpen has been good with the Lugo. We've talked about Edwin Diaz. May, for the most part, has been really, really good as that eighth inning guy. He was a guy that was brought in during the course of the offseason. And I think he's going to get the financial wherewithal and flexibility to be able to give up a piece. Now, you go up and get Barrios. I mean, I think this team has shown you that they're worth investing in. So if it costs you some pieces down on the farm, the team hasn't won a World Series since 1986. And I'm not telling you right now that they're the Dodgers or the Padres or the Giants. I'm just saying if they get there and you add to the top end, Carrasco on the mend, we'll see what Syndergaard maybe potentially adds to this team in September. Put that, say, on the back burner. Say Noah's not even a part of it. You get Carrasco, you add another starter. Even if you add, say, a solid third baseman to this group, this team is going to be really, really dangerous come October.
I actually agree with you. In fact, I think two of their worst matchups are two teams in their division, the Nats and Atlanta.
Yeah.
And you might say to me, well, this is the record and this is how many games they're up. And I understand all of that. But when I watch those two teams play the Mets is when I kind of say to myself, this is pretty even. And in some cases, we've seen Atlanta be a little more clutch and the Nationals recently be a little more clutch in those games against the Mets.
Yes.
So it's, I don't think that division's going to be a runaway. I just don't. I don't think the AL East is going to be a runaway either. It's just a little bit different than most of us thought it was going to be, in terms of the Red Sox turning things around quickly. I tell you, teams in, we're not always used to, or like I'm not always used to the team in baseball doing the quick turnaround. I feel like in baseball it takes longer, maybe because all the contracts are guaranteed. It's just more of the machinations of getting out of a hole or getting out of being really good. I mean, you can stay where you are for a really long time in baseball. I feel like that's changing just the littlest bit. I think we're seeing some teams evolve a little bit more. And I would put the Mets in that category. They've gotten a lot better in a fairly quick time period, in my opinion. And I give Luis Rojas an awful lot of credit for that. I think he sets the right tone, Moose. I think that he sets the right expectation.
Yep.
And you'll hear him, and you hear it as much as I do on Zoom, mention that his guy didn't do the right thing there. Doesn't make a big deal of it.
Holds him accountable.
He's not dramatic about it, but that he's probably already told the guy. And the guy might already know.
Right.
But the manager's reinforcing that.
Yeah, and the communication, with Rojas and his players, I think is, and you watch enough Met games, every manager's going to make mistakes, right? Yep. And I know there are Met fans that look at Rojas, some of the in-game decisions that he has made, and you scratch your head at times. It happens with every manager around Major League Baseball. You know what I love about Rojas, Kim? A story I heard that he referenced a number of weeks ago with Peterson. When Peterson was really struggled, right? And he had the two starts where he gave you a combined 3 innings, right? And a story came out where it wasn't about mechanics. It wasn't about stuff. He went up to David Peterson. He said to him, tell me what you're thinking about when you're on the mound.
Interesting.
Tell me what you're thinking about when you're on the mound. Like in between, confidence-wise or whatever. It just shows you kind of like the different level, right? We'll get into the analytics aspect when we get into the Yankees in a little bit, Kim. But, there is that, Joe Torre said it years ago, heartbeat to the game. Guys, these guys are not robots, right? You can throw all the stats out there all you want, right? It's dealing with the situation, having an understanding of dealing with pressurized situations. Not every situation is one and the same when you look at playoff
and
baseball.
not every person is.
And not every person is one and the same. So having a feel of what makes guys tick and trying to get the best out of those players. And I think that is really Rojas's greatest strength as a manager.
Imagine that. And he's a young manager. I'm telling you, I liked him last year. I remember having Anthony DiComo on from MLB.com. I have him on probably about as much as I can.
He's great.
I have him on pretty often. Although, in fairness, the writers in this town are fantastic. You and I have talked about that before when we used to do shows way back. You almost can't go wrong. There's so many good writers and columnists in this town, and he's one of them. And, we talked about early on this season, maybe even before the season started, And I said to him, do you expect Rojas to be a better manager year 2? Only because that's the natural progression. And, he obviously said yes and said that he'd already seen some of that, with the maturation of a manager in spring training. He was dead on. Luis Rojas is incredibly competent, and I get that you're going to hear that he makes these mistakes. You know what? We've heard that about every manager who's come through this town. I can remember, Joe Madden's a guy that I used to speak to a lot when I covered baseball, and we stayed in touch over the years. He has a charity function that I would go to, and now obviously it's been I don't think they've had it the last couple years, or at least the last year, obviously. So I haven't seen Joe and his wife in a while. But, I remember, you bring up Joe Madden. Well, look at how, he approaches things, and he's a little more unconventional. But you know what? A lot of what he does works too, by the way.
It does.
It doesn't all work for all of them. For any of them are going to strike out.
Yes.
Figuratively speaking.
Yeah.
When you talk about managers in Major League Baseball, they're making too many calls at in succession in games. Just like, a play caller in football is going to screw up.
Not
Imagine
everyone,
that.
Yeah, and it's going to happen. But I think Rojas, I'm happy he got another opportunity to stick around after last year,
and
especially with the change of leadership. Cohen, Alderson, and that was a call that, there are a lot of people that probably would have moved on, changed everything wholly and fully. And Sandy Alderson made it before he hired a GM, and that ended up being a disaster, and then hired a new GM, an interim GM in Scott. He made the decision, listen, Luis Rojas is coming back to manage this team.
Yeah, I'd love to know, the play-by-play there a little bit.
Yes.
Because now they're happy. Now they've got to be thrilled.
They have to be.
They have to be thrilled. By the way, because I'll forget to mention it later, this was one of my favorite moments from the Subway Series over the weekend. When Aaron Judge was out by, an Aaron Judge shoe. And he wears I don't know what size shoe he wears, but he wears a pretty big shoe. He's a big guy. He was out at first base, to the naked eye.
Oh, it's out.
And Rojas stood there staring at the field with that smirk on his face. And it turns out, we later learn that the replay system was down for the Mets in that moment. How does that happen? I didn't think that was supposed to, it's obviously not supposed to happen, Kim. Thank you very much for that insight. But I didn't think that stuff was supposed to even have a possibility of happening.
Yeah, I didn't think it had. I agree with you.
Rojas had that look on his face.
He was ticked off.
Yeah. And you could tell, he comes across, really well and everything else. We all have a side to us, though. In that moment, I was just wondering what the heck is going through his mind. And then we learned. He couldn't replay it because, I guess you could still replay anything, right? Naked eye, you could replay something.
Right, correct.
But you're obviously taking a little bit of a gamble. That wasn't a gamble. He was out by a shoebox.
Yeah, he was out.
How is that happening, by the way?
I don't know how the replay system. Major League Baseball, there's so we could go.
The replay.
We can go on for hours
misses
about
at
Major
first.
League Baseball.
The one day, the guy at first had such a bad day that I think they had to call stand. I think just because they felt bad for him, they didn't want to embarrass the home plate or the first base ump.
Yeah.
It was so bad.
So bad.
He had missed 2 calls in the first 3 innings.
Right. It's supposed to get it right.
That was the Voit one.
Yeah, and then you go back and it's right where Voigt's not hustling, running to first base.
Well,
and Luke's always hurt.
That's part of another story, man. Bigger than Voit, but yes. I know.
Yes.
I miss talking baseball with you,
I know,
Moose.
Kim. Well, we got the next 3 days, you and I.
I look forward to it.
It's going to be an absolute
Friday,
blast.
I'll talk to myself again.
No. I'll hop on. 10:18. It's Moose and Maggie.
You and Pete will come on Friday as special guests. And Dove. All 3 of you, special guest on Friday.
He's master of drop-ins, right, Dove? You like to add your personality to the show, no doubt? Thumbs up. Dove, the microphone works.